Our guest in studio this morning, the chairman of the Klamath County Board of Commissioners, Dennis Linthicum. Good morning, Dennis. So how's the campaign going? How much have you raised, and what's the reaction? Are you traveling yet, or are you just getting geared up?
We are just gearing up. I have been all the way up to Union County and spent several days actually on the way up and on the way back. Been in Josephine and Jackson County, have been well received everywhere. And people are really interested. They're interested because of the math problem that we face in the United States. It's a problem associated with sustainability with the current size and shape of the federal government. The federal government can't support all of the promises that they have made, and because they can't support them with tax dollars, they borrow money to pay for those. That borrowed money simply means they're putting it on the backs of somebody out in the future, somebody who hasn't been born yet, your grandchild or my grandchild, and those kids will be saddled with the debt that we're amassing as you and I spend those resources today.
People obviously concerned about the nation's huge deficit, but I noticed, I believe it was last Sunday, I flip around a lot with the channel changer watching the news interview shows on Sunday, having coffee and reading the paper, kind of doing all that. And I think two shows came up with economists at the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. One of the two said that really, given the slow recovery of our economy, that the deficit isn't that bad, and it should even be higher. And that one caught me off guard. I hadn't heard that before. Saying that to get things going, to jumpstart it, what's your thought on that?
I think the entire jumpstart conversation is illogical. You know, in your own life, if you're having trouble paying your mortgage, taking out a loan or buying things on credit card doesn't help you solve your mortgage problem. It just allows you to purchase more things to consume in the present arena. It doesn't really solve your problem with spending too much and not having enough income. So for the IMF, of course, is big on fiat money, and they're big on stimulating economies around the world. But I think the real beauty of the American ideal, which is based on the Constitution, is limited size and scope of government so that since we limit government, it becomes a sustainable project. If government just grows and grows and takes over more and more aspects of our lives, whether it's healthcare or housing or food stamps or EPA and control over the environment, every one of those costs money and costs resources. And somebody needs to say, wait a minute, should the EPA really be involved in a nationwide perspective? There's an example of that in air quality, if you're interested in hearing that.
Go ahead.
So air quality, you're familiar, I'm certain, with the Attorney General for Oregon joining with 6 other states in filing a lawsuit. Right. That lawsuit starts out by saying each of the states say, we are a sovereign state, we are a sovereign state, we are a sovereign state. Oregon has a little sentence paragraph in there that says the state of Oregon recognizes its sovereignty. Now, what's interesting about that is if they indeed are a standalone, sovereign, autonomous entity, why are they going to the federal government and asking them to enforce stricter regulation? The lawsuit continually points to the fact that many states exceed the EPA's proposed measure for PM 2.5. Well, if states have the ability to exceed the strictness of local control, they ought to have the freedom to do that. The federal government doesn't need to be involved, and we are wasting our economic resources by having the federal government circle around and do the same thing all the individual states are doing.
Would that end up, though, in a situation where you could have 50 states with 50 different standards for air quality, though? with no national standard?
Absolutely. What really becomes unique about that, Paul, is that creates, if you will, 50 different experiments in terms of economic stability, economic growth, bureaucratic obstructions to creating new industry. If some state wants perfectly clean air and they're willing to pour millions of dollars into that, that's a state right. If the neighboring state chooses to take a different route, we would see in the economies of each of those states, in the population movement, in their employment statistics, we would see the result of a policy that might be ill-suited. I think the problem with the federal government doing it is the standards for the Glacier National Forest can't possibly be the same as the Florida Everglades. It just doesn't make sense for one guy to sit over the whole bailiwick.
Yeah, and obviously dramatic differences in topography, geography, climate, and location as well. Let's turn, as you travel, what are people telling you about the government shutdown? 16 days, an estimated 24 to, I've heard as high as $26 billion hit to our economy. Was this just a waste of time and money, or did anybody win in this? Anybody?
Yeah. The thing that I hear most often is a complaint with regard to if the government was shut down and those people weren't working, then why did we circle back and pay them for not working? If you didn't show up here, I don't think Bob would be writing you a paycheck. And that's the difference between economies. I was talking to Lars Larson a week or so ago, and he said he had guys come in when talking about this, and they said, I'm going to call your boss and have him reduce your pay. What's interesting about that statement is his boss would reduce his pay if there wasn't enough income to pay him the salary that he desires. His boss would simply say, we can't afford you. And I hate to say that too loud. Who knows if Bob's listening?
He's down in L.A. He reminds me, though, every now and then that I'm always at the edge. It seemed, though, that when you do a government shutdown and it ripples through the national economy as deeply as that 16-day shutdown did, that creates... what are the long-term problems that we have yet to recover from as a result of that? And I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that yet.
Yeah, you ask a good question because the government is gigantic and it has its tentacles everywhere. I think where the government wasted an enormous amount of resources is in things like, padlocking Crater Lake National Park. We have 500,000 visitors to Crater Lake National Park here in Klamath County. And those visitors were cut off at the knees, if you will, even though they came from different nations around the world and were sightseeing and visiting the beauty of Oregon. We stopped them from enjoying Klamath County. And,
but that is the result of a shutdown, an intentional decision to shut it down literally because of Obamacare. And you go, wait a minute, what does that have to do with everything?
You're absolutely right. It was intentional, and it was an item that would be highly visible and cause pain within the private economy, so that everybody would be more akin to opening up the government. But what falls away from the conversation is this makes it sound like every dollar the federal government spends is well spent. And I think that's where the real battle lies. Is every single dollar spent by all of these thousands of bureaus, commissions, and legislative departments, are those dollars all being spent wisely? And I think that's a harder argument to make, that everything is going peachy. We've got to put a padlock on the gate at Crater Lake.
Well, and when you get into well spent, too, it comes down to how much do we spend every day on war? How much do we spend to make sure that we can drive to the local gas station and there's not a padlock on the gas pump because we don't have that? Or, depending on your point of view, what about the massive subsidies that major corporations every day? I know people talk about, oh, let's get the crooks off food stamps. Well, what about the crooks on Wall Street who get huge subsidies? And I think there's an element of truth to both of those viewpoints.
Right, and I agree with you. How many millions of dollars are being spent by the NSA listening to this conversation? They could just turn on AM radio and enjoy the conversation. They're collecting your email for really no good reason. You're
going
not
to
a suspect.
Facebook.
They're going to Facebook. They're checking all of these things out, wasting time and money and computer and electricity processing power, and all for naught. They didn't really do a good job of preventing the Boston Marathon bombing, although those individuals were actually identified as suspects. We were watching them somewhat, but not with any efficiency. The result was a horrid event in Boston. And I think for them to watch when my wife goes looking for a potato cooker at Walmart online, I think that's a shame that we're wasting resources in that capacity.
County Commissioner Dennis Linthicum, candidate for Congress, our guest this morning. We were talking during the break about corporate cronyism. What's your view on that, and what is it?
Corporate cronyism and the political elite love handing out our dollars, and unfortunately, they're not even dollars that we've saved in our bank account. They're borrowed dollars. So the federal deficit turns out to be a real tragedy because we're using future monies to reward corporate interests today. So the argument isn't about liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican. The argument is about those who would use the federal dollars, which are all fake dollars, to hand to constituents either at the private individual level or at the corporate level. This is a bastardization of what the United States was founded on. It was founded on these ideals of individual liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the integrity of enjoying your life and your pursuits.
And where do you see that manifest itself? I've heard that one federal agency, the Federal Department of Energy, is really used as a tool to reward your buddies who do what you want when it comes to education, or punish people that don't agree with your educational philosophy. You agree with that?
Yeah, we actually see it on a in big time in the Department of Energy. It becomes most obvious because those energy players that are in tune with where the political fervor of the day is going, they receive all sorts of rewards.
Solar, wind
versus hydro versus
nuclear
coal.
And coal, though, had done that for years too, though, didn't they?
And petroleum as well.
Yeah,
so that this has been going on for decades doesn't make it right, and we need to be able to drive all the way back to the Constitution and let the Constitution be our rule book. I've used the example, it's like the white lines on a basketball court. You and I handshake and agree that this is the area we're going to call the key, 3 seconds only, otherwise it's a violation. This is inbounds, that's out of bounds. We codify that and we write it down and we agree to play by those rules. That's how basketball works. We have Congress dribbling out in the bleachers. We have Congress doing things that are clearly not documented in that original rule book, and we keep just winking and nodding and say, it's my guy, it's my Republican, it's Greg Walden, it must be okay. And I think at some point everyone's got to come to the fact that it's not okay. It doesn't make it right because it's your man.
You can reach Dennis Linthicum. It says Constitutional Conservative for Congress on the web, email, Facebook, Twitter, and even using a phone. 855-946-5423. 541-227-5553 as well.